Our first scripture lesson this morning is taken from the book of Habakkuk. It's found on page 871 and 872 in our pew hymnals. First chapter, verses 1 through 4, and then second chapter, 1 through 4. The oracle that the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not listen? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me, strife and contention arise, so that the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous, therefore judgment comes forth perverted. And then chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. This is God's reply. I will stand at my watch post and station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me and what he will answer concerning my complaint. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteousness live by their faith. This ends our first reading.
Just a little quick background to that good reading that Dwight did. I say Habakkuk, Dwight says Habakkuk, some say Habakkuk. Both like tomato. Both are fine if you want to pronounce it either way. But kind of that Old Testament story, it's one of the 12 minor prophets that we find in the Old Testament, meaning just shorter than Isaiah and Jeremiah, so not quite as well known. But Habakkuk is dealing with a kind of conflict, and he's kind of disagreeing with God. And I'm sure none of us have ever had that issue before, right? But his disagreement is that he sees the unrighteous kind of flourishing in life, and he wonders why the righteous are suffering. You see, the Judeans are worried about an attack from the Babylonians that are coming into their city. They know it's coming, that they're being sent to hurt them. And so Habakkuk is having this real issue of how these righteous people continue to suffer and the unrighteous have plentiful in life. So you kind of hear that coming out in that reading. Hopefully you did, and he's saying, why God, why are you kind of doing this to us? So the Luke story with Zacchaeus is a little similar. There's a little conflict, and people are just kind of wondering, how can this happen, and how can people show up at the house of a tax collector? So this reading from Luke is chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. He entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. And so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. And so he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. And then Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And so for some of us, this detailed account of Zacchaeus may be a familiar story. For others, perhaps this is the first time we've heard it or even heard the name Zacchaeus. But for those of us who grew up kind of knowing this tale, we most likely likely know about it thanks to an infamous song. At least the one that I learned when I was a little tyke myself. You know how it goes, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, a wee little man. There you go. Good. You can always count on the choir, right? But I'll stop there to spare your ears from any of my singing. There's a couple more verses. But basically, he climbed up in the tree for the Lord he wanted to see. But early on, this story just kind of stuck with me, and I don't know if it's because the power of song or music or what have you. But the story of Zacchaeus and this encounter between him and Jesus, surely there's a lot more than just the song has to say. And so, the story at the heart of it, of Zacchaeus, is, of course, an endearing and frustrating one. We kind of get two different sides and perspectives to this story. On the one hand, those of us that might be short of stature, or have always, or at least once maybe in our life, received the raw end of a deal, are happy to see that the little guy gets his due and his time in the spotlight. But on the other hand, we cannot help but have that eerie, sinking feeling like the bad guy won. Or our annoying little sibling once again got the upper hand and somehow has received favoritism when they least deserved it. So within this story, there's a conflict and a balance. The conflict between the people and Zacchaeus, and an inner conflict with Zacchaeus himself. And a balance that seems to be faintly present and also needs to be restored. You see, one of the main points of contention and conflict reside in the fact that Zacchaeus is, shall we say, not really favorably looked upon in the city by his fellow citizens and residents. It's alluded to that he possibly defrauded some people and charged them for more than they actually owed when it came to their taxes. By definition, though, all tax collectors at this time are wealthy. They purchase the right to collect taxes and profit from what they charge above what the empire asks them to owe. So when some tax collectors ask John the Baptist, "Teacher, what should we do?" He tells them, "Collect no more than the amount prescribed for you," which effectively puts them all out of business. So Zacchaeus has been very successful, since Luke says he is well-to-do. Jericho is a big city. Herod has a grand palace there, and is therefore a major center of taxation. So Zacchaeus has kind of numerous underlings collecting on his behalf. So his prosperity is to be expected. And that was exactly how Zacchaeus earned his reputation. That despite his physical height limitations, his financial and vocational status was quite high, which again put him in a precarious predicament and position too. He was in a spot where people knew what he charged them was in excess of what the empire had taxed them. And that had directly resulted in him being successful on their behalf. In addition, the limitations of his height were also viewed as a negative. So if you couple this with the fact that he found great success, somehow in being the typical loathed tax collector, then you have a person that most likely lives their life extravagantly, but also alone, with no friends, does not have much in the way of family, and was not highly thought of due to their line of work. And since it's kind of mentioned descriptively, we should also kind of focus on the height and the struggles that Zacchaeus encountered when trying to see Jesus Christ. Now, most of us, I'm sure, too, can relate to the fact that we have somewhat maybe been in Zacchaeus' shoes, at least at some point in our life, from being able to see the crowd and finding where Jesus might be going, or where Jesus even is. And maybe we came up just short on a test that would have granted us college credit down the road. And maybe we had an interview with a job that we always dreamed of getting, only to find out we were not the right person for that job. Perhaps we tried desperately to find our way into a party, a group of friends, or a community that we so deeply wanted to be a part of, only to find ourselves on the outside looking in. Or maybe most sadly of all, we've struggled to see Christ through the crowd and through the trees that impede our vision. You see, deeper in this story, we find something that's strongly embedded in our roots and one that is often difficult to shake or shed, simply because of human nature. A desire for vengeance. And most of us, I'm sure, have been in the shoes of the people of Jericho. We've experienced some form of corruption. We've gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to finances or taxes, and in turn, we seek revenge. We want to get back at someone that caused that pain to us. We've been part of a crowd that didn't like us or shunned us just for being ourselves. No matter what, somehow we've felt a way and a part of both the crowd that loathed the short, successful guy and the guy that felt ostracized from the crowd. So again, we find this kind of conflict and balance rearing its head once again. And they're popping up in a very familiar place. You see, the people are frustrated with Zacchaeus. But one really wonders, aside from his position, how many of the law-abiding citizens actually took the time to get to know him? How many people knew Zacchaeus inside and out? What he liked, what he didn't like, or what made him tick? You see, that's the sentiment that I feel kind of guilty of myself too at times. For instance, I'll admit I'm an avid Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan. Sorry, I know there's a lot of Steeler fans in here, but I'm a Bucs fan. And I found myself falling in love with the players and the coaches of my team. I would often view them as the good guys, right? Hold them up in a special kind of light. And the team that they were playing against would, of course, be the bad guys. A case in point, there was at one time a head coach for the Atlanta Falcons, one of the Bucs' main rivals. And his name was Mike Smith. Every time we played them, I would find myself getting frustrated with their coach. For some odd reason, I could just not stand seeing him too much and how he acted on the sideline. When I saw him, he would parade up and down the sidelines and turned a beet dark red from a passion and energy, which I often thought to myself, man, he looks really angry. And I bet he's just a real jerk. I sure wouldn't want to ever get to know him or be friends with him or even have him coach my team down the line. And sure enough, fast forward to 5 or 6 years later after that point, and he's now the head defensive coordinator of my beloved Buccaneers. And not surprisingly, and now that I've seen him around the players and coaches for my team and doing press conference interviews, I've seen a completely different side of him. Where once I saw a coach that came across as a jerkish, and now I understand it more as a guy who cares and wants the best for his team, his coaches, and his players. So wouldn't you know, as soon as I actually took the time and effort to get to know him a little bit more, I garnered a completely different perspective of him. Go figure, right? So at the heart of this whole Zacchaeus story, both the Zacchaeus story and my own ignorance one, is the need or opportunity to change one's own perspective. A chance for a little reform. For example, how do we view even ourselves? Or how do we view other people? Are we viewing others or situations or scenarios with a perspective of where we cannot fully see all that is going on in their life? Or are we even maybe seeing too much? Or do we feel we have the best vantage point and are able to see all that is going on from where we presently stand? Are we intentional about reaching out to the outcast, the downtrodden, and those that simply seem different than us? Are we welcoming to all, no matter their race, their gender, their faith, their political party affiliation, or their social or economic status? If not, then perhaps we need a change of perspective. And maybe we even struggle to find a Jesus Christ in our own life. So amidst the chaos of work of family, of life, of church, or this hot tinderbox-esque a political landscape and environment? Or do we find it a daily struggle and challenge to see God? Or to recognize how and exactly where Christ is present with us? If so, then perhaps we need to scale our own sycamore tree and see things in a different light, or at least from a point that will help us find and locate Jesus Christ. Now, that being said, this too, of course, is Reformation Sunday, which I happen to find particularly fitting for today. It's a day in which I believe last year you celebrated the Kirk of the Tartans with Pastor Melanie when she was here, right? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, a couple were here for that, so that's good. So it's a time that kind of harkens back to our own heritage and foundation of emergence through the actual Reformation and our separation from the Catholic Church. Going back to our roots and Scottish heritage where the first Presbyterian churches began to crop up. You see, the one of the keys to the Reformation and the fact that we are a Reformed church and denomination is one of the many common sayings that we have in the Presbyterian Church. That is, reformed and always reforming. Meaning how we are today and what we believe and what we know has a chance to reform and maybe even change, depending on how God and the Holy Spirit are guiding us and leading us. And change is never easy. It's always hard, but sometimes God calls us to those new perspectives. Lastly, kind of similar to our own societal detriments and tendencies, we're faced with the tossing around of many labels in the story of Zacchaeus. We hear the specific ones: tax collector, a sinner, rich, short, poor. These are terms and labels that carry with them a typically degrading connotation. For example, unfortunately, not many people seem to like the IRS, as they're out to take our money and perhaps use it for purposes we don't really believe or condone. But we have to remember they're people just doing their job. People are quick to slap the label of sinner on someone for a wrong they have committed or a mistake maybe they have made, despite even making mistakes in our own lives. The outlook of someone as either rich or poor seeks to wrongly classify someone as one who has too much and doesn't care for others, or someone who has nothing and is only concerned with themselves. Now, funnily, the real truth to both of those polarizations is probably something somewhere in between both. And so if we care enough to actually get to know or understand a person, and then we understand their situation a little bit more, and then maybe we can seek to see them in a different light. You see, what all of this kind of means and implies is that perhaps we should ask ourselves the following question and seek ways in which they can be answered. Primarily, where do you catch a glimpse of Jesus Christ in your life? Is there a place, a person, an activity that you do that you find yourself closer to God and more connected to Christ? If not, then how can you possibly change your perspective or your habits in order to better see God and God's vision for not only you, but for the whole world? Or are there labels that maybe we use that might not be the best way to describe someone or think of them? Sometimes we must understand that God is calling us to a new perspective and we're forced to climb a tree. Other times, maybe God's calling us down to have a chat with Him and invite us back to our own home. Either way, we must be aware that we are called to go about life with open minds and open hearts, especially when it comes to other people. That's what's at the heart of this wee Zacchaeus story. A person who experiences reform and a change of heart himself, and also desires that for other people. Amen.